Great. Really wonderful to see how so many people joining. Welcome. This is the Researchers Desk weekly lunch, Wednesday lunch. Usually it is one researcher talking about their research area, but today we have a panel of fantastic women who are going to talk about alternative economic models. My name is Svetlana Gross. I'm a member of Researchers Desk and I'm a PhD student at the Stockholm School of Economics at the Management Department. My own research is about trying to understand the financial logic meeting the climate change mitigation requirements, so that conventional financial logic. But I'm also on the side a little bit involved in the movement of economy for the common good. And I just wanted to sort of quote the founder of the movement, Kristin, who always talks about, he quotes Margaret Thatcher and her famous TINA concept, that there is no alternative. And he introduces another abbreviation, that is TAPAS. There are plenty of alternatives. And some of these alternatives we will be bringing up today, but not, of course, not all of them. But my goal for today is that all of us here will go home and switch off with an understanding that there are plenty of alternatives. And next time in a conversation when we hear, oh, there is no alternative to this economic system, you will be able to move the conversation forward. You will say, well, no, there actually are some alternatives. Let's discuss them. So that's all from me. The sort of household information is we happy to put your videos on or off, but on in the discussion. We will start by giving our panelists 3-4 minutes each to introduce the topics, and then we will have a discussion between the panelists, and then open floor. And we will try to aim at finishing 13 sharp Swedish time. So we'll see how it goes.
Ask a question. Sure. Can I have share my screen while I'm speaking?
Yes, yeah, you
okay.
can. I think you have the co-host rights, okay. And then you can just share screen. Yeah,
okay.
But I will quickly introduce our panelists now, so that we save some time. So first of the Professor Kristin Vala Ragnarsdottir. She's a professor of sustainability science at the University of Iceland. She started her career as a geochemist and petrologist and in geosciences, but her recent teaching and research is on the systemic nature of sustainability issues, and including the new economic thinking, the rights of nature, and the regenerative perspective. Vala is active in several political fora. I will not be able to mention even a tenth of it, but she is, for example, advisor to the Icelandic government and ambassador and the global council member of Wellbeing Economy Alliance. So the next speaker is also from the working for the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, is Isabel Neusse, based in Nairobi, Kenya. So she has the nice weather of all of us today. And Isabel is leading the engagement strategy of Wellbeing Economy Alliance. So the next speaker for today will be Ekaterina Chertkovskaya. Ekaterina has a background in economics and human ecology. She has a PhD in management studies and is closely engaged in the research and activist community on degrowth. And last but not least, Jennifer Hinton, who recently graduated with a PhD from Stockholm Resilience Center. Congratulations. And her PhD work was on how the core aspects of businesses, such as the ownership and the legal purpose and profit orientation, relates to global sustainability challenges. So I suggest that we start in that order as I presented you. So Vala, please, you're welcome to start and share the screen.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I will put my timer on so I don't go over my 3 minutes.
You can have 4 or so, but no.
Okay. Yeah, don't tell me that. Okay. basically 20 years ago, I came to understand that we are living very unsustainably on this planet, and that something needs to be done to get us on the right track and make the planet livable for future generations. We are actually not advancing this in a very fast pace. And recently I started looking at what can we actually do? Where do we need to intervene in this dysfunctional system, socioeconomic system that is destroying the natural world? And came to realize that most of the interventions that we do have something to do with intervening somewhere very high in the system. And these are the leverage points of Donella Meadows, where she said that, the ability to transform the system is actually here at the bottom. It has to do with intent, underpinning values, goals, and worldviews. So tinkering up here, putting on taxes and standards and subsidies and so on is not going to help us very much. We really need to dive into here. So I'm going to mention first, we can change the goals of the system by changing the economy. And then we can, or changing the goals of the economy. And then I'm going to talk about ecocide law, which would actually help us to transcend paradigms and give nature rights so that we cannot continue to destroy it. So Wellbeing Economy Alliance is something Isabel will tell you all about. It is actually a global community of people which are working on putting new goals, that is, economic growth is not the aim of society, but the aim is to for the well-being of people and planet. And the prime ministers of 4 countries have already engaged with this, and now actually 5. And when you see them here, and you can see actually that surprise, these leaders are women. So in Iceland, we set well-being economy indicators, and instead of having just GDP, which is up here, we now have 38 other indicators that focus on society, wide spectrum of the economic aims, and as well as the environment. Now, if we want to transcend the paradigm, I think one way is to see how can we actually change our perspective so that we do want, and the consciousness so that we do want a different world. And Polly Higgins started fighting for ecocide law being a part of crimes against peace more than 10 years ago, and now the law has recently been redefined, and many governments around the world are now discussing this issue, which is a good thing, because actually one country that has signed the Rome Statute, where the International Criminal Court is, which is the law behind the International Criminal Court, one country that has signed this statute, of which there are 123 countries can propose it, and that others can sign up to it. And what would we gain by this? We would gain that by having ecocide law, we would have an effect on global and international agreements, and we would also have with a hard law like criminal law, we could have an impact on soft law. So this is where I propose that all of you that are working on sustainability issues, have a look at this diagram and think, how can I dive into the system at a deep level instead of tinkering up at the top. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Vala. I shared the link to Donella Meadows' websites in the chat, and so there you will be able to find the information.
And you can, if anybody is interested, you can have my slides also.
Yeah, thank you so much. So Isabel, if you want to continue on the Wellbeing Economy Alliance.
Yeah, thank you.
And if you unshare the
screen. Unshare.
Thank you, Vala, for giving an introduction. Very helpful. And yeah, so the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, we're an international organization that is trying to galvanize a global call for economic systems change. And the economy that we're calling for is one that prioritizes people and planet ahead of just profit, which is sort of the system that we're in today. And so we say we're delivering an social justice on a healthy planet. And we have what we call 5 we all needs. And these are the values. So let me share my screen. These are the values that underpin this system. So this is fairness, nature, participation, connection, and dignity. And any well-being economy must prioritize these or have an economic system that is underpinned by these values. And so our theory of change at We All is, if you can imagine a tree, and at the base of a tree, you have the knowledge and policy, and this is the evidence. This is the researchers of what everything that Vala just presented. This is what the other speakers today will present. This is the evidence of saying this is what's needed and how, and it will the importance of it. You know, why do we need a 4-day work week? Would it actually make workers more productive? These sort of things, and allowing access for people to be able to access that knowledge and policy, that evidence, so that they can then advocate. And that's sort of the next layer of the tree, is the advocacy of the narrative. How do we speak about our current economic system? People are so afraid of the economy. The economy to many people is money. It's a stock market. But actually the economy is how we produce and provide for each other, and everyone needs to be involved in the conversation. So how do we shift the way that we speak about our current economic system away from just being kind of this scary, obtuse thing that sits in the clouds to something that we can tangibly touch, feel, contribute to, and feel that we actually are a part of. And using, you know, I think there's a lot of one-liners out there, you know, economy and service to life, these sort of things, but what does this mean? How do we get people to actually feel that they have something to do with our economic system? And that is the kind of narrative work that we do. And then the branches of this tree are the power bases. This is the government. These are people. These are NGOs. This is the base of power that everyone's hopefully going to be advocating for the same change. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen just for a second. But yeah, and so that sort of will build the economic systems change as those things are aligned. I think one thing just quickly that makes We All unique is that if you can imagine an upside down umbrella, we aim to hold the space for all of the frameworks, all of the research, all of the different perspectives. This work is complex, and it depends on where you are and what context you're a part of. We're not going to be able to say there's one solution to building a well-being economy. There isn't. It depends on where you are. The solution for me, in Kenya, is going to be vastly different for the solution in Sweden. And it's not just a solution, right? It's an interconnected, interdisciplinary, cross-hierarchical, like, collaboration. It's complex, and I think the thinking, or the part of the very difficult work, is getting people to begin to sit in that complexity and toil with it, because we're brought up to say, oh, you want to write a paper on GDP? Okay, what's the problem? Here's the solution, right? And it's not that's not it. It's not that black and white. And so trying to think about, okay, what is our economic system? What is the goal of the economic system? Who are we producing and providing for? How can we take care of our planet? How does our context fit into these different questions? So I'll stop there, but thank you.
Thank you so much, Isabel. We will be discussing all these things, I think, in the common discussion as well. And then Ekaterina, please.
Hello, everyone. Very nice to be here. So in the next 3 minutes, I will give a very broad introduction into degrowth. So degrowth can be defined as an umbrella term that critiques the centrality of economic growth in our economies and societies, and calls for alternatives that are simultaneously ecologically sustainable and socially just. So what is meant by this is that the use of energy and resources in general should decrease, so something that we call biophysical throughput, whilst ensuring well-being for all on the planet. So very much connects to what the previous speakers have also been referring to. There are kind of 3 critiques of growth that we can identify as central to degrowth. So one is ecological. So basically the kind of mainstream ideas, for example, of green growth or circular economy, they have the assumption that it is possible to keep growing the economy in kind of compound rates whilst not having ecological degradation, but there is no evidence whatsoever that this is possible, because economic growth and kind of the use of energy and resources and hence environmental degradation have always been coming together. So there is a very strong connection there. And there are no examples which are long-term or which happen on the global scale of this so-called decoupling. So, but then apart from the kind of ecological critique of growth, what is very important is the social, let's say, critique. So the way growth is happening is extremely unjust. So we have immense differences between the global north and the global south. We have kind of growing inequalities in many societies around the world. And also, apart from the already mentioned ecocide that has been happening as a result of economic expansion. So also it is associated very much with violence towards people, communities, and livelihoods where they live in. So for example, if you look at the Environmental Justice Atlas, is this atlas that kind of maps the different conflicts, environmental conflicts around the world, you will see that violence is very much inherent to many of them. So, and then the kind of third critique of growth from a degrowth stance is, let's say, sociocultural, in the sense that well-being is not the same as kind of having more of material possessions, and it is possible. So good life can be defined in other ways, and good life does not have, and we in degrowth do not connect it to kind of material possessions, but more so to the satisfaction of material needs. So also similar to what has been presented for the well-being economy. So, and then let me give you kind of an idea of degrowth as an alternative. So basically, we talk about living within the planetary boundaries, so and living well with limits. And the idea is that no one should be living at someone else's expense. So, and we talk about relocalization of economies, kind of with more things being produced locally, but still with economies, of course, being interconnected. And there are many examples out there. So the tapas very much holds also for the degrowth worldview. So there are many kind of small-scale agriculture initiatives, renewable energy cooperatives, and other models that I'm sure Jennifer will also speak about. And the idea of degrowth is that change is very much, or should be, kind of bottom-up and led by communities and by different social movements, while it should be taking place at different scales. So it is important to promote the many alternatives that are already out there, whilst kind of changing the very institutions and organizations in society, and kind of intervening in policies and trying to amend the kind of structures of society in a way that that would promote sustainability and justice in line with kind of degrowth ideals. So yeah, I think that would be my introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ekaterina. And yes, Jennifer, please continue.
Thank you. Okay, I'm starting my timer too. So yes, how should we reorient economic institutions around social and ecological well-being? I'm going to change my view because right now I'm just staring at you, Svetlana. Okay, here I've got the audience, sorry. So how can we reorient these economic institutions? I work on what is the role of business and markets and how can we change them for a well-being post-growth economy. So very much in line with what everybody before me said. Currently, we live in a for-profit economy. And so in Swedish, for those of you who speak Swedish, it's vinstdrivande. And what that means is that most economic institutions in our world right now, so banks and businesses, are legally set up to enrich their private owners. That's basically their purpose. So think again about what Vala said about the importance of purpose and goals there. And the pursuit and accumulation of private wealth through for-profit businesses drives a lot of the problems we're seeing in the world today. So it drives consumerism and overconsumption because more sales equal more profit. So businesses are incentivized to put pressure on people to consume more. And all of this growing consumption and production drive environmental problems like biodiversity loss and climate change that many of us are familiar with. At the same time, it also drives inequality because you have a handful of private business owners accumulating wealth, and there's a built-in incentive to keep wages as low as possible as a key cost of doing business. So we're seeing the rise of inequality. And the last major problem that I'll talk about with the for-profit economy right now is that of political capture, because for-profit businesses also have an inherent incentive to influence policy in a way that allows them to make as much profit as they can, because again, that's their purpose. And so we see them fighting taxes and regulations that would protect people and the environment. And so it's very problematic, but luckily we don't have to have a for-profit economy. So there are not-for-profit types of businesses that exist around the world in all sectors of the economy. And I can give lots of examples, but I don't have time in these 3 minutes, so we can come back to that if you'd like. But consumer cooperatives, like Ekaterina mentioned, a lot of social enterprises. It's a very vibrant market. And so by transitioning away from for-profit types of business to these not-for-profit types of business, we could actually transition the entire market. We could end up with a not-for-profit market economy. And that would be extremely different from the for-profit economy that we have right now. So a not-for-profit economy would allow for less production and consumption, which would allow for higher levels of well-being, because consumerism is actually driving crises of well-being right now. And that would also allow for less environmental pressure from our economies. So we wouldn't be systemically driving these ecological crises. It would allow for a shrinking or non-growing economy that Ekaterina just mentioned. And there would be more equality because there wouldn't be a handful of private business owners accumulating all the wealth and no inherent incentive to keep wages low. And more democracy because there's also not a built-in incentive to influence policy for profit making. So it allows for all of these better dynamics in ways that the for-profit economy just doesn't. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you, Jennifer. And your introduction made me think about the recent Pandora papers and all the other papers, and they just pile up. And so basically, we have issues with inequality that we don't even know about sometimes. But thank you very much for introductions. And I will maybe just jump right into the critical questions, because we know about these alternatives, we know the potential benefits with them, but then when we talk about this, often we hear, but how about democracy? And the question sort of, there is a question, the aspect of time, that we have a very short time to solve the biodiversity and climate crisis, and that the populations want growth. That's kind of the message that we often get. And I'm thinking, what have you observed in your work in terms of democratic participation and the democratic engagement in these issues? Maybe you can just jump in and continue, Jennifer, and then we move.
Okay, I have to be really honest and say that I was reading some of the comments in the chat, but democratic issues and how people are democratically engaging with these. So I think that as I mentioned sort of at the end of that little talk, the not-for-profit, moving in a not-for-profit direction not only enables for more democracy because it moves us away from these very problematic for-profit dynamics of political capture and undue influence of corporate interests on our political systems. But I find it also empowers people to play a larger role in deciding the nature of our economic system. And often not-for-profit businesses, as I distinguish them from traditional charities, are operated in a more democratic way than their for-profit counterparts. So those are just some thoughts on the role of democracy.
Thank you. I'm thinking, Isabel, you're the engagement person in We All. How do you see on the democracy issue?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a core tenet, right? You have to have people like a part of whatever the changes that you're trying to do. If you just come in and tell people, hey, you know, this is a change we want to make, but they don't have any buy-in, then it's probably not going to work. And that often happens with many like consultant firms that come in to do policy work for, you know, any sort of government. And so having people participate in the process to develop whatever the desired outcome is arguably the most important pillar of any sort of economic change. I think we come into conflict when people are afraid of change. Of course, people are afraid of change. And I was thinking about this, I'm from the US, you can tell from my accent, but there's this language that's used a lot where it's like, you know, we're fighting, we're working against this or preventing from or keeping you safe from, right? And there's this whole language, it's fear-based language. But what if our economic system was using language like we're going to provide for you or give to you, or we're going to take care of you in. And so I think that's sort of a bit of a tangent around language that's used, but that is a part of the participation that's needed, or the democratization, or the, you know, allowing people to have a voice and a say and a role. It also, if people have a say and a role in the process, they're more likely to undertake it, to stand for it, to advocate for it in these things. So it's very important.
Ekaterina, I'm thinking maybe you can continue on the topic and also have the aspects of the differences between, because also Isabel mentioned, I think in her presentation, that there will be no one solution, and in different countries, in different contexts, the solutions will be maybe completely different. So this perspective of the global North and global South, simply put.
Yeah, thanks. So to continue with the democracy issue, so it is also core to the Degrowth vision, and kind of more direct forms of democracy is something that we discuss and advocate in Degrowth. But I think that also this kind of assumption that people don't want change is kind of a patronizing attitude point of the powerful. So in a way that kind of it is said, oh, well, you question growth, but actually people want growth. But there are surveys that show that people do think that environmental sustainability is more important than growth. There were some that were taken during the pandemic, for example. Or we do have a very strong climate movement around the world that keeps pointing, led by youth, that keeps pointing that it is, we need bigger change than what the kind of policymakers and companies are calling for. And in my own research, we looked at the kind of initiatives on zero waste and zero waste prevention. And we were surprised how the kind of more mainstream actors, conventional actors related to retail were really trying to kind of question this alternative and promote their own idea of very growth-focused circular economy and saying that these are actually consumers who want convenience. Well, again, we see kind of people, consumers movement driving the very ideas of waste prevention across the world. So I think that this is really kind of a discourse driven by the powerful that we should be dismantling, and there are many examples of kind of the other how it works. And then in terms of kind of the change and the differences for the global north and the global south also, so the degrowth discussion, it very much connects to the broader discussion on alternatives to development. So, and the idea is that it is not one idea that would fit all contexts, but there are multiple ideas, they do exist around the world, and it is very important to kind of respect this multiplicity when we're building a new world. And the kind of common phrase that is used, it's from the Zapatistas, that it's a world where many worlds fit. So, but united by these ideas of kind of ecological sustainability and social justice at the heart. And some examples are ecological Swaraj, Buen Vivir, Ubuntu, so some kind of other concepts around the world, which speak of similar things that what we have been bringing up here. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And Vala, I would also actually take help from the comments question in the chat, because you have been engaged with politics and politicians for a long time now. And there's a question from Michael Jones. Does the existing form of representational democracy empower people to make the changes that we need? I think this is an interesting angle to this discussion.
Well, I think for the democracy to function, you know, the citizen need to be active. You know, it's not enough just to go and vote and then wait for another 4 years until you vote again. Citizens actually need to keep the politician to the promises that they give during election campaigns. So, in my view, if we want to change the world, democracy and democratic participation is absolutely key. And I think, you know, I have some colleagues who think that, you know, we will not save the world unless we have a dictator, and I tend to disagree. I think we need to go out there and participate and show what we think, and which is what the young people are doing today, and we should support them in doing that and keeping the politicians to their words.
Thank you so much. Yes, the kind of I completely agree with you, and it's valuable to have that.
And also, if you do engage with politicians, actually they are actually out there. Most of them are idealistic and want to make a difference. So by actually engaging with people in politics in Iceland, I got my prime minister interested in the well-being economy government. So she joined, and by talking about Ecocide law, you know, the Pirate Party, where I'm active, is now very interested in becoming active on that front. So actually talking to your politicians about these issues opens their eyes to a possible new ways forward.
Yes, so the message is then to engage with your local politicians. They are there to be engaged with.
Yeah.
That's a good point. I'm actually, I think we're getting really many good questions in the chat. So I will, in case they cease at some point, which I don't believe, I might come back with my prepared questions, but I think I'll just take the question from Maria Volrad Söderberg, who is also a member of the research desk and docent, social professor, sorry Maria if I'm not getting it right in English, in climate rhetorics. And she wonders that, I mean, she said this is highly value-laden questions that we're talking about. And when we talk about other economic systems and goals, you easily end up in a conflict and a dichotomy between, on the one hand, the free market, and on the other hand, some sort of planned economy or Marxism that she has as an example. How do you think we can balance the conversation so that it does not get caught up in this conflict? And what are the thought structures and arguments that organize its thinking, and how can we talk about them? And I just want to add that this is a great point about Marxism and planned economy getting like popping up as a little like a doll from some sort of a box as soon as you start talking about alternatives. So please, if anyone who wants to, Jennifer, please.
Actually, yeah, this question really resonates with me because it's part of the reason that I got involved in this work on the not-for-profit economy model in the first place. Is I kept, bouncing into this dichotomy. Okay, we know that free market capitalism, or just capitalism, has these destructive tendencies, but the alternative, we're given only one alternative, and it's like this state-planned economy, and there's just got to be other ways of organizing the economy. And so when I got turned on to this idea of, oh, not-for-profit businesses exist, which means we could actually have a not-for-profit market economy, it totally breaks that political economy spectrum apart. It widens it up. It widens up the horizon of possibilities for organizing economies, far beyond the sort of political discourse that we're sort of trapped in right now. So that's, I think, like a lot of the alternatives we're discussing today, but in particular, this not-for-profit market economy allows for a much more fruitful discussion just because it puts a new option on the table.
And Ekaterina, you must have heard this argument a million times. Would you like to comment?
Yeah, so I would also problematize the dichotomy. So first of all, the kind of so-called free market economy, as Karpolani kind of showed very powerfully a long time ago, is instituted. So it's actually, you do need strong institutions to support the ideas of the kind of free market economy. So and then, yeah, kind of the planned economy associated with Marxism and some kind of problematic examples of how it has been implemented, of course, often acts as a scarecrow, but I think that there are different kind of modes of thought that can inform our thinking about economies and markets. So in Degrowth, there are many, so many kind of speak from decolonial stances, feminist stances, but also Marxist stances and anarchist stances. So, and I think that kind of also the thoughts, so such as Marxist thought, can be very powerful in kind of pointing to some problems with the kind of free market economy. But then when in terms of implementing alternatives, like it doesn't have to be confined to a very rigid idea of what the market is. So I will copy in the chat. There was an article, for example, by Javier Loveras and colleagues, and they looked at kind of solidarity economy as a mutualist market practice. So using and actually drawing on the anarchist ideas and on the ideas of Proudhon. So a very different way to think about kind of market practice. So, yeah.
Thank you. But I think Maria's question actually was focused more on the how can we discursively bridge that whatever dichotomy that people want to engage with. So, and actually, Isabel, I wanted to pass it on to you.
Yeah, we definitely run into this a lot, and I have two things. So one thing that helps is we just need to grow different things. We can grow more bike lanes, we can grow more parks, we can grow, more gender diversity in the workplace, we can grow more diverse workplaces. We can, so it's not that growth in and of itself is the issue, but we need to focus on what actually needs growing and what doesn't need growing. And the point of why we're focusing on growth, or if we are going to focus on growth, what the point is then. Then the other thing is my colleague, Catherine Trebek, writes a book called The Economics of Arrival. And the whole thesis of the book is that there are economies that have arrived and there are economies that haven't arrived. And so in some contexts, those economies that have arrived can slow their growth. And in other contexts, there are economies that need to continue to grow to make sure that they can provide healthy livelihoods for their people and continue to, make sure that there's not, 90% of the population isn't in poverty or something like this. And so thinking about it in this way, where we live in a world of complete polarization, we also live in a world where if you don't agree with the ruling narrative, then you're out. And if we can try to sit in the complexity and work with the nuance that is humanity in the world and own the fact that we're humans and we're hypocritical and that is what it is, it's not black and white. Growth as the end goal of our economic system is not healthy and helping our world. But that doesn't mean that we need to tell every single economy in the entire world to stop growing, because some have, like, we're left behind, or we're extracted from, and therefore are in a situation where it would be helpful for them to grow. So I think trying to, when you're in the conversation, break it down a little bit, or take it one level deeper, to try to remove just it's communism or it's capitalism. It's completely unproductive, and that's not what it is, right? It is certainly more nuanced than that.
Thank you. Yes, and I also think that there's also the rhetoric of exploiting and regenerating, for instance, and so we can really use different. I mean, it's still I'm observing the dichotomy there as well, but there are different things to talk about rather than just these kind of polarities. And as you said, what it is we should grow and what we shouldn't grow, and sort of move the discussion maybe to focus on other things. There's lots of great questions, and Kevin Noon, for example, also raises the question that I had in mind. Is that we've talked about several alternatives, and there is some complementarity among these ideas, but also some potential competition. How can we make sure that the competition doesn't lead to a loss of traction for any of these ideas? And how can we sort of grow the complementarity of these ideas? Vala, maybe you can start on that.
I'm sorry, I was busy in the chat here, so that I wasn't really listening to you.
It's a great chat, yes. Yeah. But Isabel, please,
go
ahead.
Can you rephrase the question?
Okay, the question was that all these alternatives that we have been discussing, they have some complementarity, but also some competition. How do we make sure that competition doesn't stall the traction of change, and how do we expand on the complementarities?
I think we need to realize that one size doesn't fit all, and so all of the new economic thinking ideas are important, and then need to be adopted where they are suited. And what is so good about the Wellbeing Economy Alliance is that they're not promoting just one way. Everybody with new economic thinking can participate. So, like the Donut Economics and Kate Robert is a part of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance, and I think around 200 other organizations around the world. So we shouldn't see them as competition. We should see them as complementary and addressing issues that are important in different places. It's just like, I remember when I led some sustainability cafes when I lived in Bristol, and then Transition Bristol was founded, and I went to the first meeting, and then somebody came over to me and said, "Oh, you're seeing what the competition is doing." And I said, "Competition? Sustainability is not a competition. We all need to work together." So I think we need to look at it in that way. And, for example, degrowth is something we have to engage with in the in the northern world because we are too high consumers. The Earth doesn't have the capacity to carry our consumption, but at the same time, we need to allow growth in the poorer part of the world. So all of these ideas will need to be adopted where they are appropriate.
Thank you. Would any one of you want to comment as well on the competition and the Ekaterina, please?
Yeah, I think also in the degrowth kind of community movement, we stress the importance of building alliances, and I think there are some examples of this. So, for example, in 2018, there was a letter, kind of joint letter to the European Parliament calling for putting kind of well-being rather than growth at the center of their kind of framework. And there were really people who kind of speak about this alternative economic models, but from different angles, and many people were part of driving this and then also part of signing this. Or more recently, so when the COVID-19 pandemic started, so for example, we were collectively working on an open letter from the degrowth movement, which many people and groups signed, but also we were aware of the Wellbeing Alliance preparing kind of also their response to the COVID pandemic. And I think that there was kind of cross sympathy, cross promotion, cross signing and so on. So in a way, it actually makes us stronger, the alliances. And we can do more of that.
Thank you. Jennifer, you raise your hand.
Yeah, no, I think maybe we should move on to a next question, but I was just going to say, I'm part of We All, and I'm part of the degrowth community. So I think that just as Ekaterina just said, there's a lot of crossover and synergy happening. So it's better to focus on that than any points of disagreement that might happen within or between the communities.
Yes, we should definitely move on. And we have two questions on the related topic here, which also is kind of close to my heart. Is a question from Sasha Quahen from Gross and Gould. How do you think investment and investors fit into the well-being economy and the not-for-profit economy? How to persuade investors to not seek return on investments in the face of inflation and existing expectations in investment community that the asset values must grow? And so the follow-up question, how do you view impact investments, sort of financial, social, environmental? Please, any volunteers?
Well, I think investment is incredibly important, and investors are more and more looking into investing in something that actually does some good for the world, whether it is for nature or society, which is good. And more people need to be, because the paradigm is shifting, you know, and you know, I saw on one of the banners on the Fridays for Future demonstrations was a banner that said, if you think the earth is less important than the economy, try breathing while you count your dollars. So more and more people are realizing that investing in something which is destroying the earth is not something that they want to engage in. So there are now indicators that companies are giving out to show how they are actually engaging with environmental and social responsibility, and companies are ranked on those and investors can then choose which one they want to engage with. More and more people are also thinking, do I actually need to accrue more wealth, or, you know, do I already have enough, and are, you know, engaging with investing in something which has less return, but it's something good for their heart. So we need to believe in that us humans are not just selfish, wanting to just accrue more and more for ourselves, but we all also are people that want to do good in the world.
Great, thank you, Vala. I wish I was as optimistic as you, but Ekaterina,
Yeah, so maybe here I would also be not so optimistic because investment is driven by large for-profit companies, and unfortunately still a lot of investment goes into kind of fossil fuels and petrochemicals, despite all the discussion. So for example, also I copy in the chat an article by my colleagues who have been writing about how there is an investment boom into petrochemical complexes. So as some investors are diversifying their risks and going away from like directly investing into fossil fuels, but then they find petrochemical as kind of a fruitful space for their investment. So, I mean, there would be, of course, other examples, but still a lot of investment is done into destructive industries, unfortunately.
Thank you. Jennifer, I want to give a word to you, but with a slightly other, would like to take the next question, actually. It's from Alexander Crawford, and he writes, I'm an economist, and I think many of us need help in finding out which part of the discipline, which pillars of mainstream economics absolutely need to change now, and which part are still valid. When and where did we, post-war Western economists, went wrong? And I think it's you, maybe Ekaterina, also because you've been in the economics kind of discipline. So maybe if you could comment on these things. But Jennifer first.
Yeah. So before I answer that, I'm just going to say I deal a lot with investments in the thesis that I just published. So if you're interested in learning more about why not-for-profit investment is so important and for-profit investment is so dangerous, you can look at my thesis. In terms of this question about economics and sort of like what can we keep from mainstream economics and what must we get rid of? I mean, so there's another interesting thesis that recently came out, and it's quite academic, and I actually have it propping up my laptop right now. But it's called Deliberating Value. And I think, so the Lena Isaacs, who wrote that thesis, she started as a neoclassical environmental economist, and she went through this deep journey, which goes to the root of mainstream economics, which is what is value? And then everything else in economics is built on that assumption that we make about what is value, right? Then, you know, the purpose of economic institutions is to produce value. Okay, but what is value? And if you go into that, then I think it kind of makes the case that we have to throw a lot of neoclassical and mainstream economics out. It's just not useful because it defines value in such a, I want to say disturbing way, but also a way that's just not aligned with the biophysical reality of the planet or with the reality of human nature and human needs, as Ekaterina sort of outlined earlier. So I would encourage you to look at Lena Isaacs' work, and there's a lot of rich work on this in Degrowth as well.
Thank you. Any last comments on that, on the economic discipline?
It definitely needs changing, which is something that is done right by Rethinking Economics community. And I studied economics for 4 years for my undergraduate, and it was basically shifting curves and counting equilibrium points throughout. So it really gives a very limited idea of kind of the broader context and of the, of course, the ecological and justice issues that come with the mainstream economic models. And I would say, yeah, the book of Kate Roberts very nicely kind of debunks the assumptions of mainstream economics and looks for how, or shows how we can look at economy differently.
I would say that the economic field went wrong when it was decided that the market would solve everything, because the market is stupid. You need more visions and regulations to lead where we are going than just letting the market do it. And I would also say we went wrong in educating economists without learning anything about environmental science or earth sciences. And the same for earth scientists like me. I didn't learn any economics, but I've been struggling since the economic crash in Iceland to understand what on earth has been going on in the economic field. And I found some incredible surprises where I just didn't understand how on earth such discipline could be could be developed, and it's very much based on the neoliberal thinking coming out of the Mont Pelerin Society. And they actually set an action plan, which was set out by a guy called Powell. If you look for the Powell Memorandum, you can actually figure out what the action plan was, and millions of dollars were put into taking over economics departments, writing the textbooks, etc.
Thank you, Vala. I mean, I feel like a terrible moderator, but we have 5 minutes left, and I want to open for at least 1 or 2 questions from the audience live. So if any one of you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand so I can see who you are. There's lots of good questions in the chat as well, but the time is really limited. Anyone wants to raise a hand, wave, or?
Michael,
Please. Michael Jones.
Hi, thanks. I mean, one of the questions that keeps coming up is, what about the pensions? If we stop economic growth, what are people going to do about their pensions? And I think this is a major barrier to the changes that we need within economics. So what do the panel think about that one?
Jennifer, please.
So in the not-for-profit world model that we developed, there's both a less of a need for the pension system as we have it now, because there's a higher level of equality in that kind of system where there's a better circulation of money and resources in the first place. So it's distributive by design, as Kate Raworth would say. So that's one thing, is to alleviate the pressure on pension systems. And then the other thing is maybe we can transition them into investments that do social and ecological goods. So starting up not-for-profit businesses with pensions and using like a debt-based bond system rather than stocks with unlimited returns on investment. But I think the main thing is to reduce pressure on pension systems in the first place. They're totally necessary right now because we have such high levels of inequality.
Yes, thank you. Yes, the pensions system is really locked in more and more into the stock exchange and all these processes. Like, but to end, maybe there's a question from or a suggestion from Isadora Vronsky, Greenpeace. Where will this conversation continue? Because Greenpeace is working with sort of trying to facilitate the discussion of the new economic thinking and the systemic change in the economy. How do we continue this conversation? Vala, do you have any suggestions?
Again, I was here following the chat.
Okay.
So let somebody else answer first.
Isabel, you joined.
Yeah, there's many
Wellbeing.
ways, I think, to keep this conversation going. So you know, I'll speak for WeAll first, but yes, weall.org, you can become a member, your organization can become a member. We have members calls in different ways that we try to bring these conversations to the forefront all the time, also to get people to collaborate on different projects. So if Greenpeace is working on this, then there's probably like 5 other organizations that are working to do the same thing. How do we reduce duplication in this space? Because there's a lot of energy that's being spent on the work, but a lot of it's being replicated over and over and over again. So how do we increase collaboration, reduce duplication, all on Zoom in our COVID world? So I think that's always the tricky part, but there's a lot happening. And any of these movements, whether it's donut economics, degrowth, economy for the common good, well-being economy, via Competencia, like there's many organizations that are working on this. So I think tap into some of these other networks and conversations, and you'll weave, and there's a lot of overlap. Or we're trying to kind of reduce duplication, increase overlap or collaboration, right? So that would be my first recommendation. And talk about it with people as well. Like start asking your friends, you know, what do you think the purpose of the economy is? See where the conversation goes. People don't probably think about it so much. And I think it's an important conversation to have. And I think, Vala, you were saying this, like we're lacking a vision. What are we here for? What's the point? What do we want? What do we want the system that we're living in to provide for us? And are we advocating for those things? So yeah, I'll stop talking. Thank you.
So now I'll add something to this. I think, you know, try to join the Wellbeing Economy Alliance. There are people engaged with it from all over the world, and see whether that, you know, the conversation there suits you. There are regular meetings and with regular groups. There's a youth group, there's a business group. There are all sorts of groups that you can join. They have written several guides on policy and business and so on that want to focus on well-being. And if that conversation doesn't suit you, then find another venue. I think it's very important that we all engage in this conversation, because this is our common future and the future of our of my grandchildren, which is the reason why I am engaging in this.
Yes, thank you so much, Vala, Ekaterina, Isabel, and Jennifer. I would like to really urge Toya to save the chat, because it's like that is a compendium of the recent and best research on alternative economic systems. So please, I can't do that as somehow.
For some reason, usually you can save the chat, but I cannot save this chat.
Exactly. So please.
So whoever can save it, you know, please send it to us.
Spread the chat. Lots of good links. Lots of good questions. It really seems like this topic is very relevant and engaging for, well, I don't think we've had so many visitors at Researchers Desk lunch for a while. So maybe as to continue the conversation, we might plan something else later on, maybe in connection with the review work of the Swedish political parties towards the next election, who knows. But definitely thank you so much, everyone, and connect to Researchers Desk, follow on Facebook, whatever, YouTube. There's lots of interesting conversations, lots of interesting lectures. And yes, thank you so much for this hour.
Thank you for inviting me to take part.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and beautifully moderated, Svetlana. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So save the chat.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks
everyone.
a lot. Thanks a lot, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
So much.